The family was astonished. Harold hurriedly got up and opened the door. Once he opened the door, he was stunned by the sight in front of him. At this time, a large number of people rushed in and directly commanded many security guards to blockade the scene. Then, a person in charge of the court stepped into the villa and said to the old Mrs. Wilson, who was eating, "Are you the person in charge of the Wilson group?" Before waiting for Mrs. Wilson to reply, she said to conveniently, "On behalf of the district court, I formally inform you that multiple creditors of yours have jointly filed an application with the court to request the Wilson Group and all the people in your name to freeze assets, freeze all accounts under the Wilson Group in your personal name, and force you to fulfill your repayment obligations." Old Mrs. Wilson blurted out, "I just paid back more than $1 million to the bank. The bank manager also told me that he can give me a period of grace. Why did he change my mind in a while?" The other party said coldly, "The bank considers that you have no profitability, and it is impossible to repay if you delay it. Therefore, it initiated an application together with other creditors and seized all the assets under your name. Now I will give you an hour to clean up." "I moved your own things out. It is going to be sealed." "What?" Old Mrs. Wilson stood up tremblingly, and blurted out and asked, "Seize all my assets? Why?" The other party said coldly, "Of course it is because you owe money not to pay back. Also, don't blame me for not reminding you, you can only take away daily clothes, toiletries and ordinary furniture. All cash, luxury goods, and valuables must be left behind." When Mrs. Wilson heard this, her face suddenly changed. She shook her body, and the crutch in her hand fell to the ground with a snap. She thought there was still enough time to find someone to help me, but she didn't expect that the life-giving spell was delivered so quickly. When Noah and his children heard this, their faces turned pale. "Mom? What is the situation? Our house is going to be sealed up. Haven't we already given over $1 million? With the current economic conditions of the Wilson family, if the villa is sealed, they will not even have a place to live, and none of them have any skills. The end will only be worse. Not only Noah and others are going out to look for work or part-time jobs, but even the old Mrs. Wilson has to find a place to wash the dishes. Otherwise, they will not survive at all." Old Mrs. Wilson sat down on the ground and said, "You are killing our family of 4. I just paid back the money, and you are about to take my house." The person in charge said coldly, "We are acting in accordance with the law. If you owe money, if you don't pay it back, the creditor has the right to request the court to freeze and seal all your assets. Now I'll give you a piece of advice. If you can get the money to pay off the debt, villa and account, they will all be unblocked, but if you can't pay off your debts in the next 3 months, the creditor will file a lawsuit against you, and you may be charged for fraud." Mrs. Wilson frantically hugged her legs and blurted out, "You can't seal up my villa. I have lived here for nearly 20 years. This is my home." The other party ignored her and said directly to several staff members, "First take her out and let her calm down." Several people hurriedly put her up and took her out of the door. Old Mrs. Wilson broke down and cried out, "You can't do this. You can't do this." No one paid any attention to her yelling. Noah and others were also taken out by law enforcement officers. At this time, Noah was desperate. He has seen the situation and it is now enforced by the court. If he dares to block it, it is a blatant resistance to the law. Who makes his family owe others money? Now that people go to the court to apply for enforcement, it is completely reasonable and legal. Harold collapsed at this time and said, "Dad, what can we do? Where do we live in the villa?" Wendy cried directly, "We are miserable and poor enough now. If the villa is gone, then I might as well die." Hearing the words, the Lady Wilson scratched her hair and cursed. "The Bank of the Gods. How can it do things to such an extent? It doesn't give people a way to survive." Noah blurted out at this time, "Mom, where are your antiques? If they find out, it will be all over." When the Lady Wilson heard this, her eyes went dark, and she almost fell down. Noah hurriedly stepped forward to hold her back. Then she eased her energies and said nervously, "Those antiques are all in a hidden area under the basement floor. They probably won't find it." Noah rubbed his temples and said, "If it is discovered, then everything will be over." As he was talking, another young man in uniform came in outside the door, holding a strange device in his hand. This device is a long pole with a circle in front of it, which looks a lot like the mine detector used in the movie. Noah asked in surprise, "Young man, are you a mine detector?" The man smiled and said, "No, but the principle is similar. They are all metal detectors. They will give out when they encounter metal underground. Mines are also made of metal, so this can also be used for mine clearance, but the sensitivity is almost inferior." When Noah heard that it was a metal detector, he groaned in his heart and blurted out, "It's fine for you to seal other people's houses. Do you still have to go to other people's houses to clear mines?" The man said, "With our years of seizure experience, generally as long as it is a villa, there are hidden compartments in the basement, and there are some valuable things hidden inside, so my task is to find them all. And then, according to the law, seize them." When Mrs. Wilson heard this, she collapsed to the ground. Noah's heart was also a little choked. The man hurried into the villa after speaking. Only then did Noah hurriedly help the Lady Wilson up and asked, "Mom, what's in the antiques of Dad?" Old Mrs. Wilson said nervously, "There are 2 vases, an ancient painting, and some other antiques."